session is titled MTSS in the Virtual Classroom, and we're going to focus mostly on Tier 1 literacy instruction for today. You'll notice it is part 1, and tomorrow I'll be joining in again with a part 2, so kind of a continuation of today, and we'll get a little bit more in depth with some interventions in what Tier 2 and Tier 3 literacy instruction looks like. So that's the session you are signed up for. And the next 60 minutes will be chock full of hopefully some quality information that will help you as you start your school year this year. You probably have seen this slide if you've been part of our webinars in the past. But we're focusing a lot on, during the summer blitz, on the literacy essential practices and really using those as the foundation of the work that we're embarking on, but also really being mindful of the settings that we are going to be experiencing as we start our school year. So really kind of thinking about what are some best practices in a remote setting. So we're really trying to mirror these two pieces together to give you some feedback and to give you some answers maybe to help with some of the challenging things that come our way. Our outcomes for this session will be to share some of those guiding principles of MTSS and that framework that's developed within your district or school. We'll continue to talk about effective research-based literacy practices to support that core instruction. But in addition to that, really embedding some high leverage moves that will be added to our virtual setting. For your convenience, we have a reflection guide, and this is just a way that you may choose to record your notes for today and to think about how you might utilize some of the resources and tools we share in your own personal space. Mary Lou will be plopping this tiny URL into the chat box. So if you would like to utilize something like this, you may replicate it in some of the workshops that you might be facilitating. You're welcome to use that any way you wish. So that tiny URL is located in the chat box. All of this work is really sponsored by our Wayne County Literacy Learning Network. This makes it possible for us to do all of this literacy work, especially supporting you and guiding you through the start of a school year that really is quite new to us and quite challenging in some respects with such a new scenario as we look towards the future. As we get started, we like to just go over a few norms. And we do try to be cognizant of sharing some things with you that you certainly would share with your own students. And so really setting norms and sharing expectations is a huge part of a virtual world. And you may have seen this time and time again, but we always want to be revisiting rules, procedures, and expectations. So for this webinar, we have the feature of the chat, which we all have so have gotten used to during these last few months. But there's an additional feature in this webinar with a question and answer. You certainly can pose any questions there. And throughout our session this hour, Mary Lou is running the back channel today, and she will stop us periodically to see if we can address any questions you may have. There's also a raise your hand feature. If you have a question, we can try to monitor that and make sure we're answering everything that comes up. One other thing to note in this webinar setting, you can notice in the chat that if you say hi, if you offer a strategy or a suggestion, we'll want to make sure that we take note of who we're responding to. So you'll see that we'll need to make sure we include all panelists and attendees if we'd like everyone to see your comment. So I think it defaults to just the panelists, which would be Mary Lou and myself. But if you want everyone in our learning community to see your comments or your questions, you'll have to change that to all panelists and attendees. Once again, here is just a little picture so you can kind of put a face with a name. We have Mary Lou here today. She's been my sidekick for the last 2 weeks. We haven't left each other's side. There she's waving. Thanks, Mary Lou. And myself, we're both working at Wayne Risa as literacy consultants. And we're really diving in deeply this summer on how we can better prepare for this coming year. We know that challenges have been thrown our way. In March, we were probably all just kind of swirling around saying, what can I do to best meet the needs of my students, especially when we think about MTSS and providing extra supports for those who may need a little bit more. And so we have worked around the clock, just as you have, to really provide you with as many resources and tools, but also grounded in that research of best practice. So that's what we'll be sharing a little bit today with you. All of the work that we have been participating in this summer blitz has really been rooted in these literacy essentials. And we really want to pay tribute to all of the hard work that the state of Michigan has done in association with MESA and GELN organizations to provide these early literacy essentials. So we always like to make sure that our participants are aware of literacyessentials.org. And Mary Lou will go ahead and place that link into the chat as well, in case this is the first time you may have visited that website. There's a wealth of information. One of the lovely things we'd like to share with you are the actual modules that are offered here. A lot of funding is going right towards early literacy, precisely pre-K through 3rd grade. You'll notice numerous modules, numerous Michigan teacher videos of real instructional practices happening that are all vetted in research. So we encourage you to find some time, do some professional learning, include your PLC grade level colleagues in some study and learning around these essential practices and the modules. So today we're focusing on MTSS and really just to highlight the goal of MTSS. It's really to create that systematic process, right? It's a systemic piece of work that ensures that every child that you are in touch with receives the additional time and the additional support that they need to learn at high levels. So when we talk about MTSS and we talk about the framework, we know it's a systematic process and it's involving every single child that enters our school and district. We also like to associate a visual when we think about MTSS. And this WIN model really comes into play when we think about what is it that our students need. We think it's important to have equality, but when you look at this image, you see the differences between equality and equity. Just by looking at the children, just by looking at the visual, you can begin to see we need to offer what it is each individual child needs. What supports are we granting them so that they can have access to a high quality education? So please keep this image in the back of your mind as you're conducting lovely classroom sessions, as you're making connections with students and building relationships, as you may be facilitating or supporting other colleagues. Let's be mindful of making sure equity is at the forefront of this work in MTSS. I'd like to take just a few moments and focus on the whole school, whole community, whole child format. We hear about this through ASCD and our Michigan ASCD. There's a short video that I'd like to play for you so that you can get an overview of what we talk about when we're thinking whole child. MTSS is grounded in the whole child. And let's just take a moment to view that.
For too long, health and well-being have been put into a silo, kept both logistically and philosophically separate from education and learning. Yet we know that both health and education affect individuals and society, as well as the economy. Health and education must work together whenever possible, and schools are a perfect setting for this collaboration. In 2013, ASCD and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention convened a group of leaders to strengthen a unified and collaborative approach to learning and health. The result is the whole school, whole community, whole child model. This new model combines and builds on elements of the traditional coordinated school health model and ASCD's Whole Child Initiative. It responds to the call for greater alignment, integration, and collaboration between health and education. The model expands the components to 10, placing greater emphasis on the psychosocial and physical environment and highlighting the ever-increasing expanded roles that community agencies and families must play. The new model also outlines how the school, staff, and students are part of the local community. While the school may be a hub, it remains a focal reflection of its community. The components surround the tenets of a whole child approach to education, those that ensure that each child is healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. Finally, the new model returns attention to the ultimate focus of the two sectors, the child. Join us in ensuring a collaborative approach to learning and health for each child, in each school, and in each community.
Okay, sorry about that little pause there. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is actually taking a look right here at this site. Mary Lou's going to go ahead and put this link right into the chat. And I'd like to give you a few moments as you kind of think through that video and the message that was really coming through. I'd also like to give you a few moments to read through this article within this website, just to get another overview and a little bit more information around the whole school, the whole community, and the whole child. As you consider that, I'd like you to think about a couple of questions. How is this really connected to the MTSS work? How is this really going to drive the work as you move forward? What questions might you have? Or what really is resonating with you? What affirms your thinking? So I'm going to go ahead and quiet for a moment so you have a few minutes just to read through that session. I'm going to go ahead and set my timer for 2 minutes. Okay. As you wrap up your reading, maybe some note taking that you've had, one thing we'd like to mention to you is thinking about different learners that you might come across in the school year. Today, we were able to show a video that talks about the whole child. If you're a really visual person, you might need to hear that. You might need to see that. Another option was to give you the text to really kind of go through that article that really summarizes the tenets of a whole child. And then lastly, here's another opportunity to process this information, a think and an ink. What connections did you make to the video and text? What surprised you, or what questions do you have? And how does this connect to MTSS? So again, another way to process information is to give children time to think and write about it. So we're going to go ahead and utilize this protocol just on our own to kind of think through what we heard, what we read, and how that relates to our role this coming year. I'll go ahead and set our timer for 1 minute of a quick write. Okay, please wrap up your writing, maybe finish the last few words in your sentence, and we will reconvene as a whole group. Sometimes it might feel a little awkward to have this silence during a virtual workshop, but we find it so beneficial. The feedback we have received is that we need the time to process. We're watching a screen and we're listening to one another and we're gathering great information, but sometimes that processing time is missing. And think about how important that is not only for us as learners, but think about your children sitting in their seats from home as well. So once again, there were different options of sharing: video, reading, writing, thinking. And if this was not a webinar, if we were able just to connect with you via Zoom, we would certainly have an opportunity for sharing out. You do have that avenue here with the question and answer or with the chat. I did notice we had one attendee that mentioned that oftentimes the whole child gets pushed to the back seat. They have to go, 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 make sure the kids are at this certain level for this specific data collection. It's so important that we really keep the whole child at the forefront of all of the work we do within MTSS. So I appreciate that comment. Thank you for sharing. You may have seen different diagrams that represent MTSS and the tiered instruction and intervention that happens in schools. I particularly like this diagram because it offers that whole child perspective. We're looking at academics in addition to behavior and social emotional learning. By default, my role is a literacy consultant. I often go towards that academic realm because of the work I do. But it's so lovely to have colleagues right next door to me that remind me of how important it is to build culture and climate within our community, how important it is to look at the whole child perspective. So we have to be mindful of looking at each three of these aspects when we think about MTSS, not just that academic piece. Also, the bottom diagram shows some really interesting things too. What I would like for you to notice is that tier 1 happens all across all students. Every single student receives tier 1 instruction. Only a small portion receives targeted interventions. Only some students, and you'll see that in the yellow area. And then, of course, lastly, really only about 1 to 5% of students would be receiving some more intensive interventions. So oftentimes districts will say, our triangle is inverted. We have way more many kids in that tier 2 and tier 3 layer. And so that's something to be very mindful of and something we take very seriously at Wayne Risa. That is why you'll see a lot of our emphasis is on that tier 1 universal instruction, because we need to have 80% minimum of our students really functioning at that level, at that layer. And so it's really important that we spend the majority of our time really exemplifying that core instruction and making sure we're utilizing best practices throughout the entire day. If we can beef up and make sure our tier 1 instruction is of high caliber, we will continue to see lower and lower numbers of students needing tier 2 and tier 3 supports. When we consider MTSS beginning at tier 1, it's important to think about these 4 daily goals. Making sure that we have high quality research-based curriculum for our tier 1 instruction. Making sure classroom teachers are offering differentiated instruction by utilizing supplemental resources that extend beyond a common program. In addition, aligning assessments and aligning that instruction with that assessment. Assessment shouldn't be an event or something that happens in isolation of instruction, but aligned and connected. And then lastly, monitoring students' progress. So often we have windows of assessment, making sure we're taking care of all of these formal assessments, universal screeners and diagnostics. But we know we gather so much information from our informal assessments, that formative assessment that really drives our instruction. These are some key goals that we must consider when thinking. This quote comes from authors of the book, Simplifying Response to Intervention. It's written by Buffin, Matos, and Weber. And this quote really spoke to me when we consider Tier 1 instruction. If a strong core instructional program can account for up to 80% of our students experiencing success, schools should place a majority of their efforts on strengthening their core instructional programs. This really reiterates our message that we're sending from Wayne Risa about focusing so heavily on Tier 1, making sure that it's rock solid as we lessen the amount of children that are needing those additional supports. If we're focusing heavily on best practices and high leverage moves. In order to do that, we hear the words guaranteed and viable curriculum. We hear those words often, but we know it's one of the single most important initiatives a school or a district can engage in to raise student achievement. Sometimes we hear guaranteed and viable curriculum and we're really not quite sure what that means. What it means is that we're ensuring that all kids have an equal opportunity to learn. They have access to high quality teachers. They have access to the same content, knowledge, and skills across the board in each section or class. So think about that and think about where you are in your school or district. Do we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum within literacy? Do we give all kids an equal opportunity to learn? Are all teachers effective or highly effective? And if not, what kind of supports are we giving those teachers so that they can be? And once again, how are our grade levels working in coordination with one another so that all students are receiving that content and knowledge and skills in each section or class? And then lastly, one thing I like to share with folks is really thinking about the difference between these two words. If it's guaranteed, we know that every single student is provided that opportunity to learn rigorous content, versus the viable, which means schools make sure that we've got that time, it's available and it's protected, so kids have that opportunity to learn that guaranteed curriculum. So really these two things go hand in hand. We may have the curriculum, but boy, oh boy, we need to make sure it can be followed through. We want to make sure we're giving the time and support that all students need. So you've seen probably slides like this with these beautiful images from our essential practices. We need to lean into research. We need to lean into what it says about effective literacy practices, and we continue to do so, even during this unprecedented time. It seems silly to move away from something that we know is so important. So what we have to do is kind of think about things in a different aspect, a different way, maybe think outside of the box. So we're leaning into these as foundational practices and consider different things we might choose to do in a virtual setting. Some key ideas that we pull from our literacy essentials is that they're research supported instructional practices. Why would we argue with that? Having gotten a chance to be part of professional learning these past few years, specifically around our essential instructional practices, I've really learned to value the whole notion of research. I consider a lot of the things that I've done over my course of my career as being a lot of research as well, but we're not able to really get in that vast research that we need to look at. And so we rely on people that are able to dig in there and really understand and synthesize that research so we can move that forward into our classroom. These research-based practices should be happening every day in every classroom with every child. They also are a minimum standard of care. In any classroom across the state of Michigan, we would expect to see each one of these instructional practices happening each and every day in every classroom. The nice thing is they don't really specify one program or approach. You know, in Michigan, we have local control. So the state is not suggesting that you buy this particular program or follow this specific approach. But what they are giving us is a lot of guidance as far as practices go. Again, the practices should not be happening just during our literacy block, but throughout the entire day. And we know so much can happen during science and social studies and mathematics, and we weave in that literacy and engage children throughout the day. And then lastly, the practices involve all aspects of literacy. So we're talking about writing, we're talking about reading, we're talking about phonics, phonological awareness, vocabulary. All of these pieces are woven in throughout this essentials document. And then once again, thinking about MTSS and the Tier 1 core instruction that happens each and every day, we lean into these essential practices as what we must do with every child every day to give them that core instruction and support they need. As we look into those essential practices, you'll notice that Essential 1 is really honed in on this whole notion of fostering motivation and engagement. And within motivating and engaging kids, we often think about choice. So let's lean into choice for a little bit. What can we find out from giving students choice? Here's a small little example. You may have heard of the series, Not This, But That. This particular example comes from the book, No More Mindless Homework. One of the ideas that they suggest in the book is that we give children a choice of how they will read throughout the week. Now, I think this was actually suggested when we consider face-to-face instruction, but it really made me consider, how can we weave this into our virtual setting? How can we give children the goal to read every day at home? And so what's nice about this simple graphic is that you might end the week on Friday to say, all right, guys, time to go off and do your reading. Make sure readers read every day. You can choose. Maybe you want to read by yourself. You would code that in your box with a number 1. Maybe you read to someone else in your home or in your community. You would code that with a 2 in a box. Maybe someone is reading to you. Go ahead and code that with a 3. And then lastly, how did the reading go? You might have the students reflect upon their reading. That certainly counts as quality reading activities. So this gives children a choice of how they might go about their reading for the week. Another choice to consider is something that comes from the same book, but this is a homework grid. Once again, I think it was created before the pandemic arose, but what a nice way to give children an opportunity to choose some ideas or tasks to complete for the week. I know a lot of teachers are thinking about their independent work time and what would that look like? If it's not happening in a synchronous way, how can I make it a valuable time in an asynchronous way? And just as this chart gives you examples, you can provide different choices for children, and then they may choose what it is they want to work on, what really fits their interests and needs, and yet it's still providing that choice. Also under essential number 1, we really hone in on collaboration. We know that we can motivate and engage kids if we lift up collaboration. Unlike today in this webinar, there's not a lot of collaboration, only within our chat and our question and answer, but we would certainly want to give children multiple opportunities to have breakout rooms where they can converse and talk to one another. Maybe we can organize a think, pair, share, and we have small breakout rooms. Offering turn and talk. What could that look like in a virtual setting? Chat rooms we know are important. Even the protocol we used earlier, the think, ink, and share. How might you organize students so that they have an opportunity to process, write, and then share out their thinking? Even discussion boards come into play with this as well if we're considering asynchronous work. Once again, small groups really foster motivation and engagement. If you have that ability to create small groups, what a great way to engage with just a minimal 3 to 5 children. And then, of course, something as simple as a phone call. We can easily connect and communicate with our children with a simple task of giving a phone call. In addition to choice and collaboration, we can consider purpose. When we consider purpose, we are making things more relevant to our students. Let's gather some interest inventory information. I want to find out more about my students. Maybe I'll have them complete a survey. How do I know to get them engaged and motivated? If I know what they're interested in, that will certainly be a nice start. Think about how the people in your audience might also motivate and engage kids. When you consider your classroom, we always have experts surrounding our classroom. And so we need to make sure we hone in on that and really honor the expertise from our students. Another way is really to be thinking about communication. And if we're able to have some blogs or an opportunity for emails, we're able to really solidify the purpose for the work that they are involved in. Lastly, when we think about fostering motivation and engagement, we want to build excitement. How can we build excitement in a remote setting? Let's think about the books and the texts that we're able to talk about. We had book talks in the classroom in 4 walls. We can certainly have book talks in a virtual setting, and we invite our students to give book talks as well. Also, another nice way is to think about posting book reviews. The sites that are suggested on this slide give you an opportunity to teach your children how to post a book review and share it with outside audiences. I know Mary Lou is going to try to plop in these particular links into the chat. Today, you might not have time during the webinar to browse through them, but we invite you to explore these different links and resource sites at your leisure. As we move into the essential practices, we consider essential number 2, which is all focused around reading aloud, that interactive read aloud. And it's so important for kids to be able to hear talk around reading. So not only would we invite us reading aloud to children so that they can hear and hear fluency, and you're modeling fluency and accuracy and prosody, but we also need that conversation around the books. I recall when my children, my own personal children were young, we would lay in bed before bedtime and I would read to the kids, and my kids would want to talk about the book, and I thought, guys, it's time to relax and calm down. That was probably the last thing I should have done, because we should have surrounded the book reading by book talk. So let's think about how we can really harness our students' voices during an interactive read aloud. Also, please consider different text, not always books. In this photo, you see lots of teachers that are happy sharing books, but we also need to consider other types of text. So we'll give you in a few moments a couple of resources for online texts, as well as different articles and the like. Really important information is really building sets of text, thinking about texts that are related to one another. We know from research that students are able to build content knowledge and vocabulary if we are giving them multiple opportunities to read around the same topic or concept. And so really building sets of text and giving access to those text to children will certainly help beef up their reading achievement. Some other considerations for reading aloud is really to strive for that interactive piece. Center around the talk, not just you talking, but how are we getting the voices of our students involved in the conversation. Another link that Mary Lou will place in the chat is something called Ditch That Textbook, kind of a cute name, but really what it offers is many different options for graphic organizers. When you consider a read aloud and processing the information in a read aloud, you may have to try to help students organize their thinking. And this might be a nice resource for you when you consider building graphic organizers. Another thing to consider is a vocabulary scavenger hunt. So for example, it might look like something like this. So this comes from Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. And when we see one snippet of that text, you're going to notice 3 words that are highlighted in red. This is a really nice way to go back to a mentor text, something I had read to the children before, and really hone in on a few vocabulary words. Maybe these words would be new to your students. This is a really nice way to focus in on one portion of the text, highlight a few words that may be new to students, and really talk about a child-friendly explanation of those words, as well as a way to utilize those words in other ways, such as cards or word sorts. Maybe they're pictures or expressions that would go along with each of these words. A few other things to mention about read aloud opportunities is to really thinking about modeling so that we're empowering our teachers that we work with, our students that we work with, but also our families. If a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or a grandpa happen to sit next to their child while you are reading aloud, they could certainly use that as a model. Take how you perform a read aloud and think about how they could replicate that in their own home setting. Thinking about streaming a read aloud is a little bit smoother. So instead of being live on a video, you could certainly record yourself and it may come across a little easier. If you're anything like me, I like to have a couple of tries at it before I let it go for viral. I'd like to share this one quick resource, uniteforliteracy.com. Boy, it is chock full of wonderful, high interest books that are all free and easy to access. You'll also notice National Geographic. Many of you know all the wonderful resources that are available there, but we just wanted to mention it to you as well. As we lean into the essential practices, we know essential number 6 really focuses heavily on effective writing. When we consider Tier 1 instruction, we really need to be offering daily opportunities for students to write. Their audience and purpose needs to be authentic. Consider that. There's research that proves that if a student really cares about who they're writing for, makes a wide difference in their writing achievement. If there's a relevant purpose for what they're writing about, once again, the research shows us writing skyrockets. Please make sure that the writing that you're suggesting during your writing workshop is authentic and purposeful. Think about interactive writing. When we engage our young students in interactive writing, we often have a chart paper and marker, or we have a whiteboard in front of us. How can we replicate that in a virtual setting? We might choose something like a Google Jamboard to replicate that whiteboard. There are different options, and we can make them inviting to kids as they become an interactive tool. A few other things to mention is about really bookmaking. We follow Katie Wood Ray's ideas of making books, especially in our primary classrooms, but how wonderful it is that children can make books right online. They become more adept in this technology world much quicker than we do. You might check out mystorybook.com or storyjumper.com for different book creation softwares. I know I'm throwing out a lot of resources and a lot of tools, but just as a reminder, less can be more, especially for our primary kids. Please consider selecting just a small number of tools to use a lot of times. As time goes by, you'll consider, oh, I notice maybe the engagement is sliding a little bit. It's time to incorporate a new tool or resource. Just put on your best thinking teacher's hat and know when is the best time to introduce a new tool. A few more resources to share. And once again, Mary Lou will be putting these different resource links into the chat. These are centered around building vocabulary and content knowledge. We know Read Aloud gives us an amazing opportunity to really build vocabulary and content knowledge. This is a way for us to go just a little bit deeper into that word work. And so these two resources give some nice options and opportunities for kids to play with words. Think about their definition. Think how they're related to other words that they know. So again, we hope that you have opportunities to explore these resources. We find them quite beneficial. We know there's a lot out there, but these are just a few that we think you would use with high quality. As we can consider a little bit more in that high leverage move area, we lean heavily into the work that John Hattie has done. Lots of meta-analysis have been done in this educational world, including literacy. And for us to consider some impact strategies, we really need to understand effect size. And simply put, an effect size is really an effect of a strategy on one group compared to another. How is that educational strategy effective? And when we see it labeled as 0.4, we know that it has the potential for 1 year's growth or more. If it's under a 0.4, it might not offer us a lot of effective growth within that child. And if it's above a 0.4, it's really showing us that it's quite an effective move and the children could grow even more than 1 year in growth. So as we can consider effect size, let's look at the research about access to interesting text and choice. And this is a very nice alignment to essential number 8 about abundance of time to read and to write and to have access to interesting text. So if we look at the research, what we're noticing is if students have access to interesting or cool text, it produces an effect size of 1.6, wow, for reading comprehension, and a 1.5 for the motivation in reading. That's off the charts. Let's go back and see effect size. The highest the chart showed was 1 point. And we're noticing here that the effect size, just if we give access to interesting or cool books, is a 1.6. So we're doubling a 1 year's growth, even tripling. Even with reading motivation and reading comprehension. Let's look at the second bullet. Just allowing kids to choose, just at least some of the time, the books that they can read, found another great effect size, 1.2 for comprehension, 0.95 for motivation. Those are amazing results. Why would we not give kids access to cool and interesting text? And why would we not give them choice? The results are phenomenal. Please consider that as you assign reading, as you think about your units of study. How might we give choice within choice and offer access to interesting books? That leads me to the slide about abundant and diverse reading. Once again, these are some amazing resources that we want to share with you. They're online books, they're magazine subscriptions, just offering multiple opportunities daily for kids to get into text. Mary Lou will go ahead and place those links in the chat as well, so you have an opportunity to take a look at those at your leisure. And really, this comes at a perfect time. We're at the end of our summer blitz, but we just added 2 bonus blitz sessions, and they are for September 1st and September 3rd. Our own Anne Kaskinen from michigan.gov is going to talk us through mel.org. She's a phenomenal speaker, highly engaging, and she knows everything you could know about mel.org. I was able to be part of a conference that she was part of and learned so much information. I didn't even realize all of the things that Mel had to share. So if your calendar is free and you have an opportunity to hop on from 3 to 4 on either of these dates, you'll notice one is really geared towards secondary and one is elementary. She can maneuver through this site and she does it so wonderfully. So we invite you to join us on those days.
Colleen, I'm going to interrupt for just a second.
Please.
I dropped in the chat box the actual links that will take them to the registration through Wayne Risa.
Oh, wonderful. So that even makes it easier. Thank you, Mary Lou. If you'd like to quickly register, remember all of these Summer Blitz sessions are free. So you can just quickly hop on and register for those sessions. You probably are one of the first people to know. As we wrap up our time together, we wanted to make sure we nestled into essential number 10 with collaboration with families. Our families are our partners. They're by our side more than now more than ever. We want to offer them resources as well. These are two that we found quite helpful. It's PBIS, but it's the parents, so /parents. And then also Wonderopolis is quite a nice website as well. Just giving some nice opportunity. Even if you hop on as an educator and decide to consider just a few small things you wanted to share with parents, maybe in a newsletter every week, you could just show one small resource instead of overwhelming them with the entire site. Just some more possibilities for you. As we wind down for today, we do appreciate your feedback. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's session, if you got any great ideas, and if you might be interested in more sessions like this one. We will continue to be mindful of the professional learning opportunities that we have and that we can offer to you based on your need. So you may hold up your phone and go ahead and take a picture of that QR code, or you can go ahead and hop in the chat box once more for one more link, and that would be for the feedback form. And probably now that we've shared throughout this entire time, you have probably 20 different tabs open on your computer. Hopefully they are well worth it and you have some time for exploration. We certainly thank you for joining us today. And what we'd like to do is to offer you to stay for an additional 30 minutes as we end this session and think about how we might utilize some of the resources that were suggested here today, or ways of facilitating. If you are involved in facilitating PLCs or maybe staff meetings or any professional learning that's happening within your learning environment, you can stay on for a little while longer and we would certainly share any resources. We can answer any questions you might have and actually just a little bit more time to chat with each other about all the good learning that we hopefully have been part of during this last hour. Again, we thank you so much for joining us today. And if you'd like to stay on, we will be here. We'll turn on our video and we'll unmute everybody and we'll just have some nice conversation with one another. Thank you so much.